Welcome to the 30-Minute Hour. It's the personal development podcast for the seven-figure entrepreneur who's looking to level up and become unstoppable. I'm your host, Eric Twiggs, your procrastination prevention partner. Joining me as always, you know him as the super CEO, the business strategist extraordinaire, and all-around good guy, Ted Fells.
Happy Monday, everybody. How you guys doing?
Happy Monday. It definitely is. You know why it's a happy Monday, Ted?
Because we got three bald guys together.
Exactly.
That's it.
Exactly.
It's bald guy. It's bald guy Monday.
Exactly. There you go. Well, the other reason I was referring to, Ted, why it's a happy Monday, is we're going to talk about the best kept secrets of the top 1% earners. That's right. There's a reason that the top 1% are in the top 1%. So we're going to talk about the traits and the behaviors and even some tools, because we have listeners and watchers who are looking to take that thing to the next level. So this is the show for you. You definitely want to make sure that you lean in. This is not your everyday podcast. We do things a little different here. You can, those of you watching us, you can watch us from Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube. You can also go back and listen to Apple Podcasts and Spotify. As a matter of fact, you can subscribe so that you never miss another episode of this show again. You hit that subscribe button. All right. So let's go ahead and introduce the man of the hour. He is the CEO of Sales Strategies, and a sales and revenue and profit growth expert. He is the creator of the Top 1% Academy, where he trains on how to sell to buyers, whether they be CEOs, business owners, or entrepreneurs, and how to be in the top 1% of sales earners doing so. Please join me in welcoming to the 30-Minute Hour, Doug Brown.
Wow, I got an applause and everything, especially from Ted. That's awesome.
That's it, man. I'm excited about this.
I wrote down Bald Guy Monday. I'm going to try to get that as a national holiday.
You like that? You might as well. They got days for everything. They need to have a Bald Guy Monday.
I love it.
That's right. I would be totally on board with Bald Guy Monday. We got to make that happen. All right. Well, Doug, definitely great to have you on the show once again. I do want to give people just some of the backstory and background perspective. So you, at one point, you were an undergraduate at Salem State University. What were your career plans at that time?
I was trying to figure out how to make a living, quite frankly, at that point. And I, back then it was called Salem State College, right? And they upgraded to university. So I've got to give them credit now, or they yell at me as an alumni. But back then I was really, what happened was I went into the military, came out of the military, and, I was trying to figure out what to do. And, back then it was like, well, get an education, right? That brings you to the next level. This was in the 80s. And, I just couldn't figure out what to do. So I had, taken some credits in community college and through the military. So I was like, wow, I'll put together a degree. And I did one in general studies and business and biology and music. And I was like, okay, I can go get a job. And then I went out and I'm like, well, these job offers aren't that good. So you know what? I'll go back and get another degree. I'll go back and get a better degree. So I went back, got one in nuclear medicine, because I figured, well, at least that make me sound a little smarter than I was. And the crazy thing happened, guys, was through that whole time I was going to college, I was selling music equipment to some of the bands we all listen to on the radio. And even today, they're still there. And I was having a great time. And I graduated with a nuclear medicine degree, and I got a job finally. It took me about 3 to 4 months to get a job offer. And they offered me less than I was actually making selling music equipment, having a really great time.
Oh.
So, I got to hang out with, members of Aerosmith and Boston and Billy Joel's band and the Eagles band and, all these like, Bobby Hebb. I don't know if you guys remember him. He was an older guy that wrote a song called Sunny. He backed up the Beatles. Extreme, Jake Isles band. I mean, just a lot of really Till Tuesday. I mean, just a lot of really cool people. And I just realized one day, I was like, wow, I was making more money working almost full time. And I get to go in at 10 o'clock in the morning, get out at 9 o'clock at night and go to the clubs and play music and have a really great time. Or I could go to the hospital, which was full of corporate policies at that point, and needles and AIDS and every other thing. And I was 20 something $1,000 in debt. And I was like, this is not what I signed up for. I did not sign up for making less money than I was making outside of that. So at that point I said, geez, you know what? I think I'll try to give this sales thing a run and see what happens. And that's what happened. But back then I was just thinking, I need to figure out, like so many younger people these days, even, my kids are 22 and 23. And, I listen to their friends and they're still trying to figure it out. Right. And I was just kind of in that place where I was trying to figure it out. And, one thing led to another, which led to another. And here we are today.
Yeah, so that's very interesting, right? I mean, you've accomplished like all these amazing things. I mean, you've been the president of Tony Robbins sales and training organization. You've done all these other things, and you didn't have it figured out from the beginning, right? A lot of people we get into this perfection trap. I have to have it before I start this venture. I have to have it perfectly figured out. A lot of times you figure it out as you go. So I'm just curious, like if you could go back and talk to that younger version of yourself, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give him?
Oh, I'd slap him around good. My younger self, my father, so professionally, my father gave me this advice before I went into the military. My dad was a brilliant guy when it came to solving electrical issues. Like he just had this knack. I remember people calling him on Christmas Day, hey, can I fly you out here? My company's down and, things like that. And he would go, but he gave me some really great advice. And he said, no matter what you do in life, at least like what you do. And if you can love it, even better, because you're going to work. So you might as well spend your time working at something that fulfills you. And I completely ignored that when I was younger. Because, I was like, oh, I'm going to be a doctor. You know what I mean? I'm going to go be a doctor. I love communicating with people. But I completely ignored it. And, I went and got degrees in, like I said, nuclear medicine. And then while I got out after that and I got into sales, one of the members of Boston said to me, you're a really good musician. You should probably, try out for music school. And, I grew up in an environment, not with my dad, but on the other side where good was never good enough. Right. So it was kind of like, I remember playing the piano one day. I was a vocalist and a keyboardist. I remember playing the piano one day and hearing, you'll never be as good as your grandmother. She was a concert pianist and you'll never make it in music. And here I got members of Boston telling me in their heyday, you really should go try out for music school. So it was kind of like, my mind was being blown. Right. And so I was like, screw it. I'll try one of the better colleges in the country. I'll try out for Berklee College of Music in Boston. I doubt they'll ever take me. And they did, first try. And so I ended up at Berklee College and I'm like, all right, the Cars went here, all these jazz pros went here, very, well-known, screenwriters of music and all this other stuff. And I was like, what the heck? So I started thinking about that, and I was like, you know what? I wanted to go into music. And so I did start to gravitate back into music, and it fulfilled me. And so I actually became a very well-regarded and experienced DJ in Boston. And, I was making more part-time as a DJ than I was even selling my thing. Is because I loved it, and I loved the whole atmosphere. And so when we love things like that, we tend to really go in full, right? Yeah. And I love selling. So I was there, and I was doing great there. And I think the other thing is I would have pursued myself more than trying to pursue other things, like trying to find the perfect relationship that, would be the woman of my dreams. And I would have traveled more, and I would have studied language because I love communication more, and things like that. So I would have definitely followed my dad's advice. And it took me a while to kind of spin out of that. But as soon as I started following that advice, my life became way happier, and I started making more money. So, my dad's passed on. He passed on early. But that was really wise advice. And just don't go down paths you don't want to go, because you can make $1 million, 10 million ways. That's what I've learned. It's just, you've got to be involved in the thing that fulfills you, because then, the old adage, like, if you never work a day in your life type of thing.
No, that's great.
And you'll know it's right, Eric and Ted, you'll know it's right. For all your listeners, you'll know it's right when time just goes by during the day and you're like, whoo, what happened the last 7 hours? I feel energized, and that's what we should do. Cause you can monetize anything. I've learned that, working with, literally tens of thousands of businesses. I've seen the craziest thing. Like, really, you're making $8 million a year doing what? And so, yeah, and the other thing is, remember, no matter what, we are equal to everyone else, relatively equal to everyone else in brain power. So it's really about us challenging ourselves and our skills and all of that stuff. Anything that we want to do, we can probably do. It's just sometimes we really have to believe in our own abilities more than we do.
Sure. Absolutely.
That's a great point there, Doug. Because I just think so many times we see other people do all these great things, and we think that they're, like you said, that they got this super brain, right? Yeah. Like, that all these things that they have that you don't have, or whatever schools they went to, or whatever their circle, that that really you can do, really whatever you want to do, if you really put the your mind to it, and the work behind it.
Yeah, Ted. And you see some of the greatest companies out there, like, Apple and Microsoft and, Meta, used to be Facebook, right? They all dropped out of college. Right? So, and, I've known many, many, many multimillionaires, decamillionaires, people who have made $150, $200 million and put it in the bank, who didn't have college degrees. And there's nothing wrong with college. I don't want the university people coming after me and saying, oh, you're bashing, I got 3 college degrees, but the reality is, I don't use nuclear medicine unless it's to talk to a doctor or something, to sort of try to relate to them, you know what I mean? Like, but the reality, the funny part is, I never finished Berkeley. I only went to Berkeley for a short period of time. But when people look at my CV, if you will, or, they look at like my LinkedIn profile or whatever, it never ceases to amaze me. I got a degree in nuclear medicine, biology, business, but they always cue in and they go, you went to Berkeley? My God, you must be the greatest musician on earth.
So true.
No,
absolutely.
I'm average as a musician. I was a great DJ, but I'm average as a musician. And I've noticed a lot of, even in the music field, Ted, to your point, it's not the greatest musicians that actually made it to the top. It's those people who, employ 1% earner traits that make it to the top.
Yeah, we got to talk about that. That's very intriguing. So you got into the sales lane. Now, do you consider yourself like a kind of a natural born seller, or is this something you had to work at? Let's talk about that.
It depends on what level you want to be at, right? You can be a natural born seller that's a terrible salesperson. You can be a natural born seller that is a great salesperson. But for most of us, we have some level of talent equal to the other person. And then it's about skill development, the desire, the ability to challenge our own paradigm through the process. It's one thing to say, geez, I like $1 million, or, I want to sell $1 million sales. And then when it comes to asking for that kind of money, many people are like, geez, I don't know if they want to buy $1 million thing from me. Right. Why? Right. So,
yep.
But I think I had some natural talent, but I grew up, even though my mom was, kind of rough to grow up with, she was a top Avon lady back in the 60s, right? I mean, she was also a nurse, and she made more in Avon sometimes than she made as a nurse. So, I got to ride around with her when I was a little boy, and, I would see the commissions being calculated, and I would see, the conversations going on. So I think I learned some skills from my mom for sure. And I learned some skills from my dad. And I think I had a natural curiosity for what made people tick. I almost went into psychology when I was, going through school, and I was like, why am I in nuclear physics? I like psychological statistics, so, things like that. So that's another thing for people, like pay attention to what lights you up, and then you can go in that direction. But yeah, I think I had some natural talent, Eric, but I think most people do. And when you look at children in particular, they are the most natural salespeople on the planet. They are the best salespeople on the planet. They are unfiltered. They are totally truthful. They are usually trying to help something, whether it's themselves or somebody else, but they're usually trying to help. And they have this natural ability to want to just help people. And children just, they're the best salespeople on the planet. The challenge is they get adult conditioned, society conditioned, and it says, well, you shouldn't act that way. You shouldn't act this way. My gosh, you want to be a salesperson? What? Come on, there's no used sales car lot you're going to get on, son, daughter, or whatever, right? That type of thing. And that's just, frankly, ignorance to what sales is really about. Sales is one of the most noble professions on the planet, in my opinion. It's really helping somebody with an opportunity, or helping somebody, gain that opportunity, or helping somebody solve a challenge or problem or frustration. We are selling naturally all the time. We just don't necessarily get paid for it, but we're doing it every day. I mean, if you're in a relationship, committed relationship, you are selling on a daily basis. And, if you have children, trust me, you're selling all the time because they're paying attention to everything you're doing, and they're absorbing it. So yeah, I think I had some natural talent, but I don't think, any more than anybody else on the planet.
So what advice would you have, just based on all of your sales experience and working with these entrepreneurs, if somebody wanted to improve their sales ability? They're working for Ted. They're tired of Ted getting on them for low results. So they want to improve. What advice do you have for that person?
Help them, Doug. Help them.
What advice do you have for that person to improve their sales skills?
Well, firstly, only shave your head if you have the head for it. That's
right. That's right. It's not for everyone.
That's great advice.
When I was in the military, some of the guys shaved their head, and I looked at them like, no, no, dude.
Herb, grow that hair back. Grow that hair.
I thank my father for my shape of my head. But what would I give people if they, Eric, would you ask the question again? Because I think
what advice would you give to that person who's looking to improve their sales skills? What steps should they take to become better at sales?
Number one, start with what's truthful about yourself, because that's where a lot of people don't start. They're not really clear about that truth point, right? So there are a lot of people out there that say, I want to make this kind of money, or, I want to do XYZ, but the reality is it's a nice idea. It's not truthful. And so learning how to sell is just as gratifying or challenging as anything else. Learning how to play an instrument. I tried miserably to play the flute or saxophone. And by the way, the flute is one of the hardest instruments in the world ever to learn, I believe. Right. And I was squeaking and popping all over the place. I'm sure my neighbors weren't really happy. Probably, their cats were probably hanging underneath the sofa covering their ears. And but I had to get truthful with myself. Eventually I was like, I really don't want to be a flautist. I really don't want to be a saxophone player. Right. But I did want to be a vocalist, and that was just as challenging. So we get truthful about where we want to start. That's the number one. And you'll find that you can get to be the 1% earner without being truthful, but you won't stay one. Right? You can't, because your brain and your body go, I'm not supposed to be here anymore. And if you stay over time, it's just going to drag on you. Like anything. It's like a bad relationship, but you're having a bad relationship with yourself. But if they want to learn how to sell, understand two things. What is the basics of selling? There's a dance to it, just like if we were going to do the tango, right? And learn how to dance without stepping on your partner's foot. And that's playing win-win, number one. And the other thing is wake up each day like a child who says, I'm curious about this thing. And don't self-judge ourselves. A child doesn't look at a butterfly and go, I wonder how this thing flies. I can't figure it out. Oh, I'm a failure. My God, I'm never going to make it in life, right? They don't do this. But when they can't seem to get some concept, human beings tend to go, you know what I mean? Like, it's me. And the reality is, if we wake up every day with that curiosity factor and learn about people and psychology of what makes people tick, because selling is nothing more than a communication, usually between two or more people, sometimes between ourselves, our thoughts and our brain. But when we learn how to play win-win and they win and we win, it's really about helping somebody to get to the next place they want to go. And that is either they have an opportunity that they're seeking, or they have some type of challenge or frustration that's going on or problem. And they want to resolve that so they can get to that opportunity. And all we do in selling is help them cross that bridge. And you don't have to be the most expert person in the world. You just have to care. I don't know if that's answering your question to the degree you're looking for, Eric, but that's what I would tell people.
That's good.
And then to talk to people like yourself, Ted, myself, right? People who've been there, done it, and model that person, learn from that person. Because, collective, we probably got over 100 years, of experience, right? And you can, that's one thing I learned from Tony Robbins, right? Because I watched Tony do it. Tony learns something from somebody else, and he says, that worked. I'm going to model that. And then they model it, and he gets faster results and sometimes better results than they did. So we should do the same thing.
Absolutely. No, that's great. I think the win-win piece is critical, because I think some people have a negative thing about sales. I think if you can get it, like you said, if you can get it in your mind that, look, I'm looking to help this other person, this is going to be a win-win. I think that's a big step to improving your sales.
I would agree. I do agree, right? Because the challenge that people, when they hear sales, is they're thinking about some reference to when somebody pressured them or did something that was just unethical in some capacity, right? Or unnecessary in some capacity. But, the reality is, you go drive on the highway and you'll see people driving like crazy idiots on the highway, weaving in and out of the lane. I just saw a guy the other day, and I saw in the news, they picked him up, going 112 miles an hour up the highway, weaving in and out of traffic. Well, that's not playing win-win, right? That's playing win-lose. Somebody could really lose and really lose bad. But the reality is we see somebody like that when they drive by and we go, oh, what a no good, rotten, whatever, right? Or we've driven that way and whatever, in our younger days, when some of us own motorcycles, I used to drive like an idiot at times on motorcycle, right? But we don't look at that and equate that to a salesperson. If a salesperson does something like that, we go, oh my God, they're not ethical. They're not right. They're not this, right? But when somebody's driving 112 miles an hour on the highway, almost killing people, we don't go, I'm never going to drive. I'm not going to drive because I'm not going to be one of those drivers. We might say we're not going to be that person. But I remember one time I had my mom in a car in North Carolina and she went into an asthma attack. And that woman was turning colors.
Yeah.
And the hospital was 22 miles away. I guarantee you, I broke the speed limit all the way, right? Because I was doing that, playing win-win, win for my mom, win for me. I didn't want to lose her at that time, and I don't want to lose her now. And she didn't certainly want to go at that time, right? Now, I was the idiot on the highway. So the reason I bring this up is because people, when they look at salespeople, they usually are having some reference to something that either was taught to them through parental or, society in some capacity, or they've experienced it themselves and they go, I don't want to be that person. And the truth is, you don't have to be that person. You can play win-win, and that will get you way more down the line than driving 112 miles an hour down the highway, because that person won't have a license anymore. Right. And, thank goodness he didn't kill somebody, right, in the process of that. Now, the thing is, in selling, you're probably not going to kill somebody, but you could kill their business. You could kill, their cash flow, right? So if we look at that and we take care of this person, like they're a precious, precious, precious item, we play win-win. If it's not right, we get the car and we don't drive with them. We don't take them down the highway at 112 miles an hour and scare the heck out of them. We disengage from that relationship at that time and tell them why. Hey, look, I'm not the right guy who can help you. I'm not the right person who can help you. I've done this several times in the last month where I've said, I'm not the right guy, but this gal I know is, or this gentleman I know is. And so I put them together. And so that's how you play win-win, and you get relationship capital out of playing win-win that you can never get. And if you want to get into the top 1%, you must have relationship capital. It's just part of the game. And because relationship capital opens up doors for us that we never thought possible. I mean, imagine being friends with, President Obama or past President Obama, where he's no longer president, but my gosh, the relationships that man has, I'm sure that, if you helped him out, 12 years or 15, 20 years ago, and he remembered you, he might open a door for you that you would take decades sometimes to even open.
No, that's a great point. No, that relationship capital is key.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about this top 1% Academy that you're the creator of this. So what exactly is it, and what inspired you to create it?
Well, it's a secret organization that we can't talk about. No, I'm kidding.
That's it.
Ted, I got a smile out of you on that one.
I was like this.
Leaning in. So I created this. What is it? It's a training process to teach people how to think, act, and be a 1% earner. Because this might sound a little arrogant, and I don't mean it to be, but since I've had access to working with really powerful business people, big companies, multi-billion-dollar corporations and the CEOs, and I've had the pleasure of working with Intuit and Proctor and Gamble and CBS Television, Enterprise Rent-A-Car, and Nationwide, and big companies. And I've worked with tens of thousands of medium and smaller size businesses. And I've met people who are making, $25 million a year, And what I realized was they're not any different than the three of us on this line. They really aren't. They all have similar fears. They all have similar things that have happened to them in life where we could relate. You know, anybody who's listening now who's ever had children, you can relate to another parent, right? You know, when your child, you know, the other child, I love this when I go into the airports and there's a baby having a meltdown on the airplane and all the people are like going, oh my gosh, can you shut the baby up? And I'm like, you never had a child in your life, right? It's not going to happen. Just, you know, eat your food, read your book. It'll pass, right? Because that baby's not going to listen to you. It's not going to happen. And so, especially if the baby's having ear challenges on the plane, it means painful, right? So these people all have similar fears, challenges, love, desire, all of these same things that every other human being is, but the only difference is they're making a tremendous amount more money than the average person. So what is different about them that is not different about, you know, or different than other people, right? And it really came down and started boiling down to some traits that they learned. A lot of the traits were not natural traits. You know, some of these people were very shy people when they were growing up, and they've had to challenge a lot of their past childhood wounds and, you know, and develop confidence and test themselves and keep pushing themselves beyond their confidence level. And then realizing, oh, I beat that one. Wasn't as scary as I thought, right? So, okay, now what next level can I climb? You know, some people it happened by accident. You know, I respect Steve Jobs' business acumen. I think he kind of got there by kind of a little bit by accident, as well as he got there by, being Steve Jobs, right? There was a timing in the market that I saw that, computers were, widely accepted. And there's timing in the market where computers were like, no way, we're not touching those things. I mean, that's the only big things run by government organizations. Like ATMs are another example. They sat, I think, for 13 years or so before people would commercially use them. So there's all of these things. So confidence, persistence, things like that. That's what I was noticing. And so what I noticed is people didn't have access to this stuff, Eric, because they hadn't had exposure to it. They could read it in books, but they never really had it working with these people. I've been in these corporate boardrooms listening to them talk about multi-billion-dollar projects. And the only difference between a multi-billion-dollar project and a multi-million-dollar project or a multi-$100,000 project or a multi-$100 project is a couple of things. One, the number. And two, one might be a little bit more involved than the other. So I started taking all these traits and studying them and figuring them out. And then I was like, okay, how can I help the person who wants to have more income think and act like this person? And then how can I put a system together where I can help train them to think that way? And how can I do this in a way that they feel safe and confident? And how can I do this so it's just not training, but it's application, so that the application sticks? There's one thing to like watch hockey on television. It's another thing to jump on skates and go play with, I don't know, pick your favorite team, the Boston Bruins in my case, right? So I wanted to capture all of that, and I did. And so then I started saying, okay, I'm going to test this. And I did. I started testing this with test groups, and I was having these off the chart results. I had one guy go from $140,000 a year in commissions to $2.1 million in this first year in commissions, right? Another lady selling $15,000 services as a coach, and she started selling $300,000 services, right? And this was happening within like 4 to 6 months on most occasions, that they were starting to go through this transformation. So that's why I developed the organization of the 1% Earners Academy, if you will, because I wanted to help people who wanted access to this information, but really couldn't afford to get, in on these big deals all the time, because it costs money to get into those big deals. You know what I mean? I just happen to have relationship capital, like through Tony Robbins, Chet Holmes, Russ Whitney, and CEOs of major companies who would introduce me to other people saying, hey, I helped him or I helped her. So now they referred me to another person. And so I wanted to take that and give it to people who wanted. The second reason I did this is because as I get older, I realize what life's really more about versus trying to make, money and all that. It's about being happy, right? Because, I just had a friend of mine. He's 59 years old. He died. You know what I mean? Dwayne Podesky. Dwayne and I and Brian Jackson, we when we were teenagers, we were 17 years old. I remember sitting out in front of Brian's house. We had 2 little pints of rum. We're 17-year-old guys and we're drinking and having a good time, right? And I remember the police came up and they took Brian to his house and then they took Dwayne to his house. I still remember Dwayne's mother screaming at him, right? And we were just having a good time. And after we, felt better like 4 days later because we were really sick, we all got together and we were laughing about all this stuff. But this is a guy I grew up with who was healthy his whole life. This guy looked like Lou Ferrigno. I mean, he was a big man, right? Worked out all the time. Cancer, COVID, right? So that makes you think. So I started thinking, well, this is what I want. I want people to have access to more happiness in their life. And I want to help them financially, but also on the mind side of the business, because you got to change the mind side of the business. If one doesn't, then, you'll still have the skill sets, but I want to help people in a cost-effective way in order to be able to do this. And that's why I started the Academy.
Yeah. That's awesome. So what are the key critical 1% traits that we need to be aware of?
Well, people who are we're talking about sellers at this point, like people who are selling, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's sellers or non-sellers, 1% earners think in leverage, in terms of leverage. In other words, they think strategically about their strategic objectives. How do I make this one thing be 5 things, 6 things? So for example, if I'm selling to someone and it's not the right fit, like I just did, I passed them the referral to people, but in return, these people trust me. So now I ask them for referrals to somebody I can help. That's one strategic objective. So no matter whether they say yes or no, we're always trying to get a referral. We're always trying to expand the sale of some sort through relationship capital, through, other opportunities, internal or external expansion, because we're working easier. It's a lot easier to have a repeat sale, whether it's internal, external, or it's a lot easier to get a referral where they pick the phone up and go, hey, Eric, you got to meet this guy, Ted Fells. This guy, Ted, did this for me. And my gosh, I was thinking about you. So I got Ted on the line here. I want to introduce you guys. If you have that challenge that I think you have, likely about 80% of the time, it's going to close.
Yeah.
Right. So it's so much easier for you, but now you're getting leverage, right? And we're creating leverage through relationship capital. So they think about leverage at every single thing they do. If they're going to send an email, they're thinking, okay, how do I get that email to multiply? Everything we're doing is about creating leverage, not one-time activity. Because that's, there's a book out there, a friend of mine, David, introduced me to, I think it's called 10X versus 2X. And so we're thinking more leverage, and 10X is about creating leverage in a lot of ways versus 2X. So we're not thinking linear, we're thinking expansion. Okay, that's number one. And we're thinking expansion on the sale itself, but we're thinking about expansion on a consistent basis. We look at people that we talk to as someday potential buyers. So we're building relationship capital. So, I know for myself, it's taken me sometimes 2 years to close sub relationships that I've stayed with. I remember one in particular, I used to go out and have lunch with somebody once a quarter. But in 2 years, the first account that they introduced me to was NASCAR. Okay. Was that worth 2 years of quarterly Chinese lunch? I think it was.
Absolutely.
Right. So That's the first thing. The second thing that they do is they're constantly charging after what people would call the status quo, but in their own lives. They're consistently looking at their self and going, how do I increase and make myself 1% better? And then once I get to 1% better, how do I make myself 1% better? It's not an ego driven, like I'm, want to be 1% better, so I'm better than the guy or gal next to me. It's how do I challenge myself so if I think differently? Because I remember the first time I asked for, like in the consulting business, first time I asked for $35,000 a month for consulting. Up until that point, I was charging $7,500, and one of my friends actually challenged me on this. He's like, "You can get more," and I'm like, "No, I can't." Right? I couldn't figure out, like, who would pay me more money than I'm paying. So he's like, "Okay." I won't say what he's called me because I can't over the podcast. But
this is a family show, right?
It was a bit like, you're a wussy type of thing, right? So the next time I was talking to a business owner and they were doing about $14 million a year. And I said, "Hey, this is what I think you should do." And they go, "This is unbelievable." And they said, "Well, what would it cost me?" And I said, it's going to be like 6 months. It's like $35,000 a month. And I had my fingers crossed behind my back, my toes crossed, everything, right? I'm surprised my eyes weren't crossed. And literally I said that, this is what it will be. And it took less than 5 seconds for this person to say, "Okay, cool. We'll cut you a check." And I was like pinching myself to see if I was actually like still alive, right? I'm like, oh my gosh, I just sold a $35,000 thing at 6 months. Right? That's like what? 180,000 plus 30, $210,000. I sold 4 more of those in the 6 months. Right? So I'm not being braggadocious or anything like that. I just want to illustrate to people that you're going to have doubts, but 1% earners constantly are challenging those doubts. Right? Now, I'm not suggesting if you're afraid of bungee jumping that you just go bungee jump without any experience. That's not what I'm saying. You want to challenge in a safe way, put yourself in an environment where it's safe and realize it's not so scary. And then all of a sudden you start to develop confidence. 1% earners there's a profile for them. And the profile is they're a combination of what is a top producer and an overachiever. So a top producer, this goes way back to like, I don't know, 1510 or whatever it was, where top producers would network and make articles of exchange happened at the top. Well, back then it was the nobility, right? It was like you dealt with the nobility. And then overachievers, those are the people that quota's never good enough. It's a starting point. Do you know what I mean? Like my goal, I'm exceeding it. I'm just constantly exceeding it. And it doesn't matter whether you're in sports and you're Tom Brady, for example, like him or not, he's been there and he's done it, right? Yep. Or whether, you're a musician, I would say the Rolling Stones or Van Halen or, any musician that we want to pick that's just been there at the, constantly. Aerosmith, and they still fill places, right? So it's one of those things that's an overachiever, and it can be in all areas of life. It could be in art, it could be in music, it could be in whatever. They just have this drive that I want to be better than myself. And to the point of this, it is about their personal performance, not about what other people judge them on. So these are learned traits. They're, maybe people were born with these or something, but most people are not. They're born with them, but they don't expand them because they've had them contracted through societal pressure. There was a time, this is funny, crazy. There was a time where I thought, because I had no hair, I was missing 2 teeth in the front because the dentist pulled them when I was young and we couldn't afford to put them back in, 2 permanent teeth. And I was 5'8", right? And I read an article that said the IBM top professional salespeople were well over 6 feet tall. They had long, full head of hair. They had a white smile, and those are the most successful salespeople in the world at that time, IBM salespeople. And I was like, God, I'm not that, right? And then it clicked in my head. Out of 315 people in the organization I was in, I was outselling all of them. And I went, something's wrong with me. What's wrong with this thought process? Well, I'll tell you what was wrong with me. It was my own limiting self-mirror belief, right? And then I got to meet some people from IBM, and I'm like, these people don't know how to play win-win. They don't know how to sell. They don't know how to do this, right? And so sometimes we just have to shatter that part of ourselves, guys. And that, but it's a top producer meets an overachiever trait who's consistently looking at their own performance and measuring themselves based on their own performance, not against the measuring stick that, because there's always going to be somebody who has a bigger boat. That's just the way, right? So it's not against that. It's against our own self.
All right. All right. So if I'm hearing you correctly, Doug, they tend to think in terms of leverage. They're thinking of ways to expand, create expansion, thinking expansion. They're always challenging themselves, and they tend to be overachievers.
Yes. So, if you want to boil it down, it's sales expansion, mind expansion, and performance expansion, really, when it comes down to it. And it's something that is a learned behavior. And once we learn how to do it, we realize, okay, that's not as hard as we think it is. It's like, and you got to start where you're at, one, and then you graduate up. I've got a friend who's like, he wants to ride a motorcycle really fast, and he's never ridden a motorcycle. And I've ridden motorcycles, and I'm like, this guy's like 6'4", and he's like, what should I do? I'm like, get a little 125 cc and ride it around out on the grass. And he's like, why? I said, because if you dump a 1400 cylinder Harley Davidson that weighs 700 pounds going around a corner on asphalt, you are not going to like your day. But if you dump that 125, you'll learn how to ride the bike, then get a 300, and then get a 500, then get a 750. And then, then keep graduating up, because the bikes are different. And you're not going to ride a Harley Davidson through, stones and rocks and wood. So if you ride your 125 through that type of thing, you learn how to balance, and you learn how to not hit a tree, that type of thing. So that's the thing too, is understand this is a long-term lifetime play that never ends as a 1% earner.
Awesome. It boils down to that mindset. So I did want to get to this too. You're also the host of this awesome podcast, the CEO Sales Strategies. What can people expect when they tune into that?
Oh, they can expect great guests like yourself.
Hopefully.
What was that, Ted?
I said, hopefully.
Yeah. Look, so the CEO Sales Strategy podcast was started on a double dare. I didn't want to do a podcast. I was busy. I just didn't see any real sense in starting a podcast. I was doing fine. But a friend of mine said, I bet you can't do a show that's amazing. I double dare you. Now, I have to go ask him whether this was by purpose or not. But I started this podcast and I said, okay, you know what? I'm going to teach people how real business owners do it. We're going to talk about the ugly, the good, the bad, and the magnificent. I'm going to bring people on there who have actually done it and struggled in business and now are, doing deca millions, 100 millions, billions, whatever. We're going to talk about that from a sales perspective. And so I just started originally, like most people, you go to your warm network, and eventually I started saying, okay, I got to get out of that. And so we started going to the colder networks. And, I was calling upon people like the CEO of 1-800-GOT-JUNK, And I was like, listen, I read your story. I really appreciate where you came from. you started in college and you just started this business on the side, and then it kind of grew and grew and grew. And I like to feature you on the CEO Sales Strategies podcast. And, he's like, okay, I don't know you, but since you had the courage enough to give me a shout like this, I'll give it a shot, right? This is a guy who has a $500 million company, doesn't know me from the hole in the wall, but because I use part of the formula in the win-win play, he was like, hey, I'll give you a shot. Well, guess what? He referred me to other people. And so, we started doing that. I called the longest tenured CEO in Silicon Valley. His name is Raymond Zinn. And he's in his 80s. He just sold his company. He made $1 billion. Why would he come on my podcast, right? So I got him on there, and we talked about how he was kind of instrumental in selling the first silicon chip wafer type thing. And so, we've had people like that on there. And then we've had people who train people like that, like Eric with you in procrastination, which is like really, really, really important for people not to procrastinate, because perfection is the enemy of forward motion and then done, right? And so we looked at specific things that the audience was telling us, hey, I'm looking for this. And we find experts like yourself on that subject matter, and we bring them on. And that's how it started. And that's why I started it. And to my surprise, it's taken off like crazy. And so, I will continue to keep doing it. It's kind of more of a mission at this point, where we've now started morphing it to the 1% earners, and we're bringing people on. Like I got the gentleman coming on from, he was the #1 sales rep at Apple for 10 years. So I got him coming on, right? We're going to talk about how it happened. He was telling me about Steve Jobs and, all the guys there. We've got people who are making $1 million a year selling or plus, right? Coming on there. I've got Mr. Dan Pink. He wrote a book called To Sell As Human, and other things coming on, right? So it's been really gratifying. And I got to tell you, I've learned more from talking to these people than I could ever teach them, right? So, and so my audience learns the same.
All right. Yeah, this has been a fantastic episode. You do have an ebook coming out as well on the top 1%.
Yeah, I finished it. I finished the first run of it. Can I give it away on this podcast?
Absolutely.
Great. You can go to CEO salesstrategies.com /1 P as in Paul, E as in Echo. So 1PE, 1% earners. So it's CEO sales strategies, plural.com /1 number PE. And they can pick up the book.
All right. And we'll put that in the show notes too, so people can access it there. But now that's an awesome opportunity. I mean, if you've been listening to this episode, you need to get that ebook, because it's definitely all about your mentality and your mindset. And I'm glad you cleared up this idea that, these top 1% people, they aren't that different. They have a few different things about them, traits and behaviors, that if others apply the same thing, they can join the same club.
Yeah. The only thing I think, Eric, is the people have to have desire and commitment. But I've literally trained people who had no sales experience whatsoever. And from places like people go, well, they can't sell, they're too methodical, right? Like engineers and accountants, like mathematicians, right? People like that. I trained a mathematician, and she got 31 sales in her first 3 weeks. So it was kind of like, I was like, okay, this worked really well. Right. So, and in that 31 sales, she made more in those 31 sales than she made the previous year in her business. So it's just a matter of, we have to come with open mind, open heart, and understand that sometimes we're not going to feel all that intelligent at times. And it's okay because we're in a safe environment where we're helping step by step by step, move from fear to neutral to confidence, right? And that's the whole key.
For sure. For sure. So we're now at the final segment of the program. It's called Write This Down. And this is where we each go around and give at least one thought or idea from today's segment that the people need to write down so they can level up. So Doug, we'll start with you, the guest of the hour. What do the people need to write down from this episode?
Whoa, okay. I wasn't expecting this question. So here's what I would tell people. Realize the business you are in is not the business you think you're in. The business that if you want to be successful in your business that you must be in is client acquisition, not your product or service delivery. Because without clients, you cannot deliver your product or service.
Write that down. Absolutely. You are in the client acquisition business. All right. All right, Ted.
Tough act to follow, man. I just think it's all about connecting, not the sales.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you can connect with people, right? And it's natural because no one really likes to be sold to. Like when you're at home and somebody's calling and they're trying to sell something, you don't really want to, have that discussion. And and if you're just out and somebody just comes up and just kind of presses play and just kind of starts giving you their spiel, you don't necessarily want that. Just learn how to just connect with people. Right. And that's something that I constantly work on. Any opportunity I get, I'm trying to connect because, like you said, Doug, if I can make it a win-win, right? If I'm at a restaurant and a server comes up to me and I connect with him or her and say, hey, what do you recommend on this menu? Right. And they tell you and they're really excited to tell you and if you get it and you come back and they feel good, you tip them well, like everyone won, right? That's that whole win-win scenario that you talk about. And so I just think that if you constantly work on, like you said, that win-win, and not so much the sales, right? Because that's another thing that happens. Sometimes you'll meet people. I'll know folks that have worked for multiple companies. And so you're at one company and you're selling, and then the next year you're with the competitor and you're saying, hey, this is the better. And that consumer's thinking, wait a second, I thought you told me company X was the greatest that ever's done it. Now you're telling me company Y is. Right. So I think that you really have to, focus on on connecting, because if you got that connection, you can have a customer for life, So yeah, write that down.
And that's a form of leverage, Ted, right?
Yeah.
Because you can make that call and they're like, okay, I trust you.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, sometimes, Ted, I trust you more than I trust myself because we have that kind of great relationship, right? So you tell me this is good for me. Okay, it's good for me. And I buy it and it's good for me. Great. I love you even more, right? So now we're even more connected. And Ted, I did want to say one thing that you said, which was so important. In all these CEOs I've ever interviewed, they always told me one thing. They don't like to be sold to, they like to buy. So to your point, you don't have to sell. You just have to make that relationship so they trust you more than they trust themselves. And they like to buy. Everybody likes to buy. The right thing.
That's true.
Absolutely. Yeah, so great points for write this down. And so my contribution to this has to do with this. We talked about creating this win-win. And for me, it starts with the belief. And I think that I'm sure the top 1%ers, they have a belief that what they offer is going to help you to win. I mean, so much so that they believe they're providing you a disservice if they don't tell you about it. And I think I just think that that's the level. Like if you have a book, you have to believe that. Look, if I don't tell you about my book, it's like it's like if heaven forbid you have cancer and I have the cure and I don't tell you about it.
Right.
I think that's the level it has to be, that you honestly have to believe in yourself and believe in what it is that you're offering to help that person win, to the point where you wouldn't dare not say something about it, not present it, give them the opportunity.
Well said. That's moral obligation is
Yes.
what I've heard that called, right? And
yes.
And Eric, I think you bring up something really cool, which I don't think we touched upon. I mean, we sort of touched upon it, but the reality is, like, we're talking about 1% sales earners, right? But there's all kinds of 1% earners in everything, right? And sometimes a 1% earner is not making 1%. I mean, it might sound a little weird to some people, but sometimes being in the 1% doesn't mean you have to be in the 1% earners. There's a lot of people out there that are happy in the 3% or the 5%, right? But when I think about a procrastination expert who's in the top 1%, I'm always telling people it's you, right?
Oh,
so somebody's got they got that issue where they're procrastinating. It's like, go see Eric Twiggs. You won't procrastinate anymore, right? Because he's the 1%. Right. And so it's just, I wanted everybody to understand that the thinking and acting like a 1% earner doesn't necessarily mean you have to make 1%. You can, I know a lot of people that are happy as can be on $200,000 a year. That's not in the top 1%, but they're really, really happy. And then I know a lot of people that, are making $2.5 million a year who are the most miserable people on the planet. Right. So it's about the rounded person as much as, I mean, we've all seen like people on TV where we go, they had it all and they aren't here anymore due to their own reasoning. Right.
Yeah.
It's like, why? It wasn't the money that made them happy. It was something else that, was making them miserable because they had way more money than the average person ever would have. So I appreciate you bringing that up. So that I wanted to bring that up, like, as a 1% expert, you're the tops when it comes to the procrastination. And I know this because I've talked to so many people about procrastination, and no one has that knowledge that you do.
Oh man. Well, thank you, man. That means a lot coming from you. That's awesome. That's awesome. This is an episode you need to go back. Matter of fact, Ted, when I'm in the gym tomorrow, I'm gonna be on the elliptical playing
this back. Playing
this
back.
back.
That's right.
Some things I can't catch when I'm hosting. I have to listen to
That's true.
all these nuggets that Doug has been dropping here. So Doug, please let the people know how they can best connect with you.
Yeah, they can send an email into. I usually tell people to send it into YouMatter, YOUMATTER, at ceosalesstrategies.com, because I have a team of people who watch that. Or they can send it to me directly at Doug at ceosalesstrategies.com. My LinkedIn is Doug Brown 123. I have people reach out to me there. Those are usually the better ways to get a hold of me. And certainly you can go to ceosalesstrategies.com and read more about, if you get the 1% book, I will, I'll be staying in touch anyways. I usually send out something like once a week, that's of value to people. I don't, hit them every single day. I don't like when people do that, right? When like you get enough emails and you get enough stuff, it's like, well, and they send, 10 things a week and it's like 9 are irrelevant. And, so it's like, we tend to just like once a week, we'll send something out, say, hey, we're here and here's some invaluable, content that you can consume, which is usually very relevant to your life. So, but that's how they can get a hold of me, Eric.
Great. Okay, this concludes this week's episode of the 30-Minute Hour podcast. Don't forget to listen on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, any of those places. And don't forget to subscribe so that you never miss an episode. Until next time, have a great one.